Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Bible study series. Excited to be back today. Had a nice kind of a long weekend last weekend and everything, and just kind of getting back in the groove and whatnot. And today we have a great part of the Bible study today. We are going to be going over chapters 33, 34, and 35. So we're going over 3 chapters. This is part 27 of the Bible study series, and it is sure to be a good one. If you did not happen to check out part 26, definitely do so, because I know that it's a long one, but it is awesome, especially there when we get into the end of chapter 32 there, and just the whole experience that Jacob had in wrestling with the man, wrestling with the Lord, as we came to understand and find out, and just what that signified, and the spiritual side of that, what was going on. Really crazy, and so amazing. And God saying, hey, now your name is going to be, you're no longer going to be Jacob, you're going to be called Isreal. And man, it is so good. So we get into chapters 33. 33 is a short one. So we're going to cover that, kind of chop it up and get into 34 and 35 a little bit more in depth and everything. So as always, I'm excited for this. Please pray beforehand before diving into the Word, and let's go. So this whole time with, Jacob is journeying back to his homeland and everything. We remember the whole situation with his uncle Laban and how just kind of ugly that turned out, and he flees from him. That whole situation, it did end up kind of ending in a peaceful kind of agreement between Jacob and his uncle and everything. But this whole time, now Jacob is just, when we talked about in chapter 32 where he was wrestling and everything that's going on, he's in such fear and angst and just this despair, within his spirit about returning home to his brother, who he's going to encounter, Esau. And remember what happened, the reason why Jacob left, and the whole deception and everything. And Esau was like, you're dead, dude. I am going to kill you. And so all these years have passed by, and Jacob's just like, man, I don't know what's going to happen. He's trying to prepare in the best way possible. He's scared out of his mind. But at the end of the day, God's like, I got you. Everything's going to be okay. So here we go. We start off chapter 33 where it says, then Jacob looked up and saw Esau coming with his 400 men. So before, remember, he sent out the servants and everything, brought gifts and all that type of stuff, and was trying to just get a sense of Esau and just his attitude and everything like that. And he really didn't get it. But here he goes. And now's the time. Here comes the interaction. So he divides up all the children among Leah, Rachel, and his 2 servant wives, and he put the servant wives and their children at the front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. So then Jacob goes on ahead in verse 3, and as he approached his brother, he bowed down to the ground 7 times before him. Now, during this time, in the context, bowing down 7 times was such a sign and symbol of great, just putting yourself in a humble servant-like position, very humble, giving all of the honor and respect to the person that you are bowing down to. So again, Jacob is just like, all the focus is on you. I am humbling myself, and you know what? I'm giving you all the tribute and respect and honor and everything here. So he's bowing down 7 times. This was a custom, of the times. And then look what it says in verse 4. It says, then Esau ran to meet Jacob, and he embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they both wept. Man, it's such a different reality compared to the picture that was in Jacob's mind, right? Compared to what he was thinking, all of the fear and the worry that was building up within Jacob, and the reality that actually happens is just the complete polar opposite. Esau is actually excited to see Jacob, his little brother, right? He runs to meet him, embracing him, throwing his arms around his neck and kissing him, right? This was such a sign of affection and everything. And they both just started weeping, crying, just like, oh my gosh, it's been so long. Jacob probably weeping in relief and just like, oh my goodness. And Esau, he just hasn't seen his brother. And obviously, this is such a cool thing, because we see here where, again, years ago, Esau had the type of mentality where he was just out for revenge. He was out to just kill his brother. He wanted to take back, in a sense, what was, deceitfully taken away from him. He wanted to do that in the wrong way. But look at how time has changed his mindset, started to change his heart and everything. It is such an amazing thing. And the two, they go on to kind of have conversation between each other. Esau's like, who are all these people with you and everything? And Jacob's like, God has given everything that you see here, my family and all the livestock and everything that you see. It is God who has graciously given them to me and everything. After they kind of have their bonding moment, their reconnecting moment and everything, they kind of go through to where they're each trying to give to each other and that type of thing, and they're like, it's not necessary, just keep what is yours, everything like that. Esau's even saying, hey, let's get moving. Jacob's like, I've got a lot of livestock, a lot of young children and everything like that. Don't want to push them too hard, or the animals will die and things like that, and the kids, all that, it'll just be pretty tough. So they say, all right, Esau, you're just going to go out ahead in front of us and everything, and Jacob, gonna make our way kind of at our own pace type of thing. So what happens is that Jacob, he actually travels. Esau had turned around and started back to Seir, but Jacob actually traveled on to Succoth. Okay, and there he built himself a house and made shelters for his livestock and everything like that, which is why it was named Succoth, which means shelters. And it says in verse 18, it says, later, having traveled all the way from Padam Aram, Jacob arrived safely at the town of Shechem in the land of Canaan. And what I want you to notice is here in verse 20, so small but so key. It says, and there he built an altar. Okay, and this is so good, that wherever Jacob was going to kind of set up camp, set up residence, kind of near his brother Esau and whatnot, but he's in this other land of Shechem, in the land of Canaan, and everything. His first priority was to actually build an altar, right? Giving that honor and everything, and just such a key priority right there. And there's kind of a question as to why why Jacob didn't go to exactly where Esau was. We don't really get any answers on that. Esau went out ahead of Jacob and whatnot to one spot. Jacob said, we'll meet you there, we'll get there eventually, but then he kind of turns around and kind of goes elsewhere to Succoth, and then eventually the town of Shechem and Canaan. So don't really have any information on that. I think just kind of maybe worked out that way, and what was best for for Jacob and his family, or something to maybe for a divine reason that we'll find out here in a second. I don't know, because of what's about to happen to as far as where they end up and everything that takes place. And we'll kind of see how this small little decision to not really link up completely and exactly where Esau was turns into, just not good. All right. So we get into chapter 24, or sorry, we get into chapter 34. Told you 33 is really quick, kind of catching up with Esau and everything. But in chapter 34, it says, one day, Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah, all right, remember they had a daughter together as well. She went to visit some of the young women who lived in the area. Okay, the area being the land of Canaan. They're in this town of Shechem. All right, verse 2. But when the local prince, Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, saw Dinah, he seized her and raped her. But then he fell in love with her, and he tried to win her affection with tender words. And he said to his father, "Get me this young girl, because now I want to marry her." Man. Alright, so they arrive. They, Jacob and his family kind of set everything up here in this town of Shechem and whatnot, builds an altar. This is kind of where we're going to be for a while. One day, Jacob's daughter, Dinah, goes out. She wants to see how the other women are living, looking, what they're doing. She's just kind of wanting to experience the area. All right, we'll get back to kind of that point here in a second of how this all starts stacking up. We see obviously that this does not end well. That the prince, the son of Hamor, his name was Shechem, which is the name of the town. He saw Dinah, he took her, and he raped her. Okay, this is horrible. And so even after this horrible thing takes place, he then falls in love with her. Okay, kind of just this weird thing that happens here, and he tries to win her affection with tender words, and he's like, "Dad, I want to marry this girl." All right. Soon Jacob heard about this. All right, but since his sons were out in the fields herding the livestock and everything, he said nothing until they returned. So Jacob shows some restraint here. Okay, this was an awful thing to hear. He doesn't say anything until his sons are going to eventually return. But what ends up happening is in verse 6, Hamor, Shechem's father, he comes to discuss the matter with Jacob. All right. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons had actually come back in from the field as soon as they had heard what happened, and they were shocked and furious. I'm reading along here in the middle of verse 7. He said they were shocked and furious that their sister had been raped. Shechem had done such a disgraceful thing against Jacob's family, something that should never be done. Shechem's dad tries to speak with Jacob and his sons and everything. He's like, "Hey, look, my child, he's truly in love with your daughter. He raped her. He's madly in love with her. Please let him marry her. In fact, let's arrange other marriages too. You give us your daughters for our sons, and we will give you our daughters for your sons." Now, we already know about, how this is viewed when it comes to this covenant family that that God is developing and everything from Abraham on down. And when it comes to marriage outside of that, when we're talking about these Canaanite women and everything, it's like, no sir, we are not doing this. All right, so Shechem's father, Hamor, he's trying to set this up and everything. All right, and then Shechem himself spoke to Dinah's father, Jacob, and Jacob's sons, or brothers, and everything. And he's like, "Please be kind to me. Let me marry her," he begged. "I'll give you whatever you ask. No matter what gift you demand, I will gladly pay it. Just give me the girl as my wife." All right, in verse 13, check this out. But Since Shechem had defiled their sister, Jacob's sons responded deceitfully to Shechem and his father. Alright, here we come. Here's that word again. Deceit coming into play. Alright, we know how Jacob was in his youth and everything, and what that led to, and just compounding things, and just, just trying to take everything into their own hands. Here we see it starting to happen once again. Jacob's sons, they said to them, alright, we could not possibly allow this because you are not circumcised. We talked about circumcision, chapters ago and everything. The covenant family, this was something that was, to symbolize their part of the covenant family and everything and whatnot. This was their thing. So they're saying, oh, we can't possibly allow this because you are not circumcised. It would be a disgrace for our sister to marry a man like you. But here is the solution. If every man among you will be circumcised like we are, then we will give you our daughters, and we'll take your daughters for ourselves. We will live among you and become one people. But if you don't agree to be circumcised, we will take her and be on our way. So the brothers, Jacob's sons, they know that this is not going to happen. But they give this idea and they propose this solution that will allow this whole, what this Shechem desires to actually take place and kind of smooth the waters over, so to speak, and whatnot. such a deceitful thing, and it was, they did it this way for a reason because of what's about to happen here. In verse 18, it says, Hamor and his son Shechem agreed to the proposal, and they don't hesitate. So Shechem, Hamor, all of the men in this town get snipped. And these are grown men, at this point, and doing a circumcision, doing something like this at this point, is going to cause, a great more deal of pain and discomfort and things like that, than, obviously if you're a baby and just don't even remember it, that type of thing. And all right, verse 24, it says, so all the men in the town council agreed. Every male in the town was circumcised. But check this out in verse 25. But 3 days later, when their wounds were still sore, 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, who were Dinah's full brothers, took their swords and entered the town without opposition. And then they slaughtered every single male there, including Hamor and his son Shechem. They killed them with their swords, and then took Dinah from Shechem's house and returned to their camp. And it says, meanwhile, in verse 27, the rest of Jacob's sons arrived, finding the men all slaughtered, and then they just plunder the town because their sister had been defiled there. They took the flocks, herds, and donkeys, everything they could lay their hands on, both inside and outside of the town, in the fields and everything. It says they looted all their wealth and plundered their houses. They also took all their little children and wives and led them away as captives. Man, we're going to talk about just how one little thing can turn, into what this just turned into. Let's finish this real quick though. It says in verse 30, it says, afterward, Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have ruined me. You've made me stink among all the peoples of this land, among all the Canaanites and Perizzites. We are so few that they will join forces and crush us. and I will be ruined, and my entire household will be wiped out. Sons are like, why should we let them treat our sister like a prostitute, etc. That ends chapter 34 there. Before we get into chapter 35, I want you to see these patterns and all of these types of stories. So for one, all right, we didn't quite know. We mentioned it about why did Jacob send Esau out of head to back to his home and everything, and saying, I'm going to meet you there, but then he doesn't. All right, we don't really have an idea of why that happens, but we're seeing that certain things, when you do that, when you're staying away, you're keeping yourself kind of excluded, maybe for good reason, maybe or not, I don't know, just exactly what can happen, something like this. So instead of kind of teaming up with his blood, with his family, and his brother Esau, and going back to his father and everything like that, he kind of journeys off onto his own type of thing, and it can leave a crack in the door, just a little bit of room for something like this to take place. And so we gotta gotta think that maybe there was a wiser thing to do with Jacob, and really just sticking, kind of tying himself to Esau until he gets back to his home and everything like that. Again, I'm just kind of throwing that out there. Maybe that's something that should have been a little bit more thought out and everything. But then we get to Dinah and Jacob's daughter. It's so funny how I wrote a note here, how Dinah was unwise in following her desire to see the other women of the land. All right, we've talked about just seeing what, and taking part in what we're not supposed to. She was fully aware of how the Canaanites were viewed, and how there needed to be this separation. That's why this whole covenant family is being built and grown and everything like that, is to create, this separation, to make themselves distinct, as this covenant family, and to be different, to be, in this tight union and relationship with God. But she wanted to see how these women were living. Okay, she had this desire to know what, I guess, what's on the other side, that type of thing. And it can seem so small, right? But she wanted to get acquainted with the Canaanites, and this ends up, with her being raped, and then it's like one sin just keeps piling on to another and everything. We talk about Jacob's sons, the deceitfulness and everything that was taking place there. The study Bible says here is their desire for justice was right, but their ways of achieving it were absolutely wrong. All right, so it says, when tempted to return evil for evil, leave revenge to God and spare yourself the dreadful consequences of sin. And again, we talked about Jacob. He restrained himself. Like when he first found out about this, he didn't say anything until his sons arrived. Kind of mentioned this was a wise thing. This was showing great restraint and patience. But once his sons found out, man, they just, young and we're just like before. We're going to take matters into our own hands and look at how we are going to make this right. Instead of trusting in God and that, a divine justice is going to take place. They say, no, justice is in our hands. Revenge is in our hands. Watch what we're going to do. We are going to deceive to make this happen. All this sounding familiar. To get what we want out of this, we are going to deceive. Okay? And deceive they did. The people of the town, Hamor and his son Shechem, they all got circumcised, murdered. Every single one of them were slaughtered. Not only that, man, all the other brothers came, took everything. They took everything from these people because of one little thing, that desire, again, to leave, that comfort, that covering and protection, and just go and see what's, how the others are living. And it can seem so harmless, so innocent, and look at how it leaves a wake of just absolute sin that has just gone to the next level. All right, man. So here's what happens in chapter 35. God shows up, and it says, "Then God said to Jacob, 'Get ready and move to Bethel and settle there. Build an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau.'" Do you guys remember this? When Jacob was fleeing Esau years ago, scared for his life, he's all alone, had nothing but like just a staff. He said that, and he lays down on this rock, has this vision of this stairway, this pathway that was connecting heaven and earth, what all of that represented. And God is saying right here in chapter 35, he's saying, go back, move to this place, this Bethel, move here and settle here. Build an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. So it kind of seems like this maybe should have been Jacob's goal and desire to begin with. We talked about that. Why did he follow Esau? Why is he kind of going out, selling kind of in his own way? God comes into the picture after this whole mess happens and says, this is where you need to be. All right, trust me, you need to go here, and this is where the covering and everything, this unity, whatever you want to call it, is going to be. So Jacob, he tells everyone in the household, get rid of all your pagan idols. All right, we talked about that in the last section, how people were keeping these household items, and they were idols that represented certain things, getting advice, that they worship, other gods, what have you, that type of thing. Jacob's like, get rid of all of this stuff. Purify yourselves and put on clean clothing. Throughout this whole journey, it's like, the people in his family and everything, they had accumulated, just kind of taken on this, outside dirt and filth from all the Canaanites, all these other pagan people and nations and things like that, and it had come into their family, into their households, and everything's like that. And Jacob's like, get rid of it all. Purify yourselves and put on clean clothing. He's like, we are going to Bethel. He called it Bethel because this is the house of God. So if we're going here, we have to be purified. We can't we're entering into this special presence and experience here. Guys, we got to come correct. All right? This is key. Verse 3, it says, we are now going to Bethel, where I will build an altar to the God who answered my prayers when I was in distress. He has been with me wherever I have gone. It says in verse 5, skipping down, in verse 4, Jacob, they gave all their pagan idols, even the earrings and everything, to Jacob. This is very, very key. And he buried them under the great tree near Shechem. And I wanted to point this out because this is so key. I have it highlighted. I'm going to actually circle that as well. The fact that Jacob buried all of these things. So, man, this is such a great sermon in here. Such a great nugget that is so cool. Again, purifying themselves, getting rid of all of that outside influence that was, could start to become an internal destruction within their household, within their, themselves and everything. Just all of this outside influence, getting rid of it, okay, before we are going to approach and enter Bethel, this house of God, where God clearly was in that place. And what he does is he takes all of those things, instead of just, putting them away to where you might just move stuff in your house to a different area and just kind of put it out of sight in a closet or something like that. He doesn't do that. He buries them. He puts these things to death, which is such a small thing that I think that we can pass over. I wrote this note. It says, by Jacob burying these things, it was removing them from sight and putting these things to death. And this equaled a symbolic leaving the flesh and the worldly things behind, putting those things to death, our flesh to death, our worldly self to death, and coming into our true selves, into the presence of God. All right, man, great sermon in there. But just want to point that piece out. So cool. We move on into verse 5, and it says, as they set out, a terror from God spread over all the people in all the towns of that area, so that no one attacked Jacob and his family. Especially after what happened with Jacob's sons slaughtering, the men in the town of Shechem and everything. Word probably got out about that really quickly. And man, they're in this foreign land of Canaan and whatnot, and they're traveling through, and there's probably going to be a lot of other Canaanite people that would want to just get back at, destroy them, kill them and everything. But nope, God sent out a terror across all the towns of that area. All right, they finally get to Bethel. In verse 7, Jacob built the altar there and named the place El Bethel, which means God of Bethel. I want to point this out, the fact that the El in El Bethel, the El stands for God. Okay, God, El of Bethel. Very key thing there. We talked about in the intermission video about Elohim and that word and what that represented and everything. So hang on to that. Such a small little thing, but very cool. Said because God had appeared to him there as he was fleeing his brother Esau. Alright. In verse 9, it says, now that Jacob had returned from Padam Aram, God appeared to him again at this place of Bethel. God blessed him, saying, your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. From now on, your name will be Isreal. So God named him Isreal. And that means, this is such a cool thing. Isreal means God fights. So when we go back to where Jacob and the Lord were having this wrestling match, so to speak, where it was more of this spiritual twisting and tension. Jacob just wanted something from the Lord, and he wasn't going to let go until he got it and everything. And the Lord was like, you have fought with God and men, and won. You've been victorious. And now he's going to name him Isreal, and this word itself is meaning that God fight, because you have fought and you have kind of wrestled with me and everything, and with men and everything that's gone on in these last few chapters. You, my people, I am going to fight for you. Israel, this nation, means God fights. God fights for you. That's an awesome name. Man, what a name. So cool. It says in the study Bible, all right, God reminded Jacob of his new name, Israel, which means God fights. And although Jacob's life was littered with difficulties and trials, his new name would remind him of his dependence on God, the God who would fight for him. And again, when we talk about the significance, the symbolicness of names and everything, there's such a purpose to how the Lord names people, and oh my gosh, and everything like that. And guys, this is so key, because we're already seeing how God has been fighting for this covenant family and for it to come about and everything. I'm gonna tell you, the entire rest of the way it is going to be the same thing. God fighting for his people, fighting for us in such a beautiful way, so that the ultimate purpose and will for this complete restoration will absolutely take place. So man, it is so crazy. Hang on to that. God fights Israel. God fights for you. God fights for you and I. Man, so awesome. What he says after that, in verse 11, he says, I am El Shaddai, God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. Where have we heard this before? Alright? I'm telling you, Genesis is so awesome, especially the very beginning. Remember that first command that was given to Adam and Eve? Was this right here. Be fruitful and multiply. Here we have the naming of Israel, which is the name of the nation, meaning God fights for you. And there he gives this command, be fruitful and multiply. You will become a great nation, even many nations. Kings will be among your descendants, and I will give you the land I once gave to Abraham and Isaac. Yes, I will give it to you and your descendants after you. God reaffirms the covenant. I love how this is always happening. This is always such a key thing that we're going to see. God constantly reaffirming and stating what he has said before. He's already said this, in a few different words here and there. He's already said this type of thing to Jacob before. I love that. He said it to Isaac. He said it to Abraham, and he just continues to reaffirm, to reassure, to acknowledge this covenant, this promise, and everything that is taking place. And so amazing, absolutely incredible. Here, the end of chapter 35, it says that Rachel actually got pregnant again. She went into labor there, where still some distance away. Her labor pains were intense, and she had a very hard delivery. But her midwife, she said, don't be afraid. This is verse 17. You have another son. Rachel was about to die, but with her last breath, she named the baby Benoni, which means son of my sorrow. And the baby's father, Jacob, however, called him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. So there we go, guys. The last and 12th son that that we've talked about since a few chapters ago. Here comes Benjamin, the last and final, the 12th son. And man, it's a doozy, because with this birth, Rachel does die. She passes away. So it says, verse 19, Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a stone monument over Rachel's grave, and it can be seen there to this day. It gives a list, verse 23 through 26. It gives that complete final list of the sons of Jacob and how it breaks down and everything. So again, make sure that you have note of that. This is going to be so important, so huge in this nation of Israel that is being built and grown and everything. All right. And then it says in verse 27, Jacob returned to his father Isaac, where Abraham and Isaac had both lived as foreigners. And Isaac lived for 180 years. And then he breathed his last breath and died at a ripe old age, joining his ancestors in death. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. Alright? He breathed his last breath, died at a ripe old age, joining his ancestors in death. I know every time someone passes away, I'm emphasizing a certain thing there, and we're going to start to uncover it a little bit more and more and more. Won't do that now. But man, Isaac, what a life, 180 years, and everything. Jacob did return home to be able to bury his father. Remember, we said that with Jacob's decision back in his youth and everything, with his mother and whatnot, man, she's already passed away. Unfortunately, we talked about that and everything, and that's the end. That's the end of chapter 35. So there's some great things in these 3 chapters and whatnot. Make sure, I know we kind of were skipping ahead. We covered really the main parts, but make sure that you read through really thoroughly with everything, and just hold on to these bits, especially with Isreal, and that meaning God fights, and how we're going to see that throughout the rest of the Bible. And man, this is the nature, this is the character, the type of God that our eyes and our hearts are going to start uncovering more and more of. It is so amazing, and I'm so excited about that. Next video, obviously, we'll be getting into the few next chapters and whatnot. And guys, we're getting close to the end of Genesis here, and that's it's crazy. I know so far it's been a long journey, a lot of time put into this, and I hope that I hope and pray that you all are really getting getting some good stuff out of this. I love you, and take care until next time. We'll be back soon.